Our community knows no. We are not confined by the physical limits of walls, or for that matter, of what often binds us, restricts us, holds us back. We are freer than we know when we release ourselves and each other from expectations of what is needed for true community. We are here, together in space. I see you, I hear you, I love you. And I light this chalice, a beacon of this community, holding us all together here, now.
Bright morning star arising, bright morning star arising, bright morning star arising. Day is breaking in my soul.
Bright morning star arising, bright morning star arising, bright morning star arising. Day is breaking in my soul. Rise up from morning slumber, rise up from morning slumber, rise up from morning slumber. Day is breaking in my soul. Rise up and hear your calling, rise up and hear your calling, rise up and hear your calling. Day is breaking in my soul. Oh, lift your voice to heaven, oh, lift your voice to heaven, oh, lift your voice to heaven. Day is breaking in my soul. We'll build this faith together, we'll build this faith together, we'll build this faith together. Day is breaking in my soul. Bright morning star arising, bright morning star arising, bright morning star arising. Day is breaking in my soul.
Today I'm going to tell you the story of Jesus and the loaves and fishes. This comes from John chapter 6, verses 1 through 19 in the Bible. A large crowd had been following Jesus around because they liked to watch him do miracles and heal the sick. So Jesus went up on the mountain and sat down there with his disciples. Now, the Passover, the festival of the Jews, was near. When he looked up and saw a large crowd coming toward him, Jesus said to his disciple Philip, "Where are we to buy bread for all these people to eat?" He said this to test him and kind of tease him, for he already knew what he was going to do. Philip answered him, 6 months' wages would not buy enough bread to feed all these people. One of his disciples, Andrew, who was Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what are they among so many people?" Jesus said, "Make the people sit down." Now there was a lot of grass in that place, and all the people sat down, about 5,000 in all. Then Jesus looked at the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. So also the fish, as much as anybody could want. When they were satisfied, he told his disciples, "Gather up the fragments left over, so that nothing may be lost." So they gathered them up, and from the fragments of the 5 barley loaves left by those who had eaten, they filled 12 additional baskets. When the people saw the miracle that he had done, they began to say, "This is indeed the prophet who has come into the world." And that's the story for this morning.
This old world is full of sorrow, full of sickness, weak and sore. If you love your neighbors truly, love will come to you the more. We're all children of one family, we're all sacred, old and new. If we cherish one another, love and friendship come to you. This old world can be a garden full of fragrance, full of grace. If we cherish one another, we must meet them face to face. It is said, now love thy neighbor, and we know well that is true. This the sum of human labor, true for me as well as you. This old world is full of sorrow, full of sickness, weak and sore. If we love our neighbor truly, love will come to you the more.
Benjamin Franklin was asked by a woman in the crowd, "What do we have, doctor?" And he said, "Our republic, if we can keep it." So I'm thinking a lot during this shelter-in-place period of the things that are required in keeping the republic. And what are the things about our culture that we want to hold on to historically? And where did we learn this stuff? And how are we going to be remembered by history? Tom Brokaw wrote a book called The Greatest Generation, where he talked about my grandparents' generation, the people that were born before 1926. My grandfather was born in 1910. My grandmother was born in 1908. Robert Casey Sr. and Elizabeth Eugenia. They went from cars to computers and everything in between. I think of my generation and just the things that I've seen in my lifetime. Vietnam War, when I was a kid, I'm watching it on black and white TV, landing on the moon, the civil rights movement, anti-war movement. So as we shelter in place, there's a lot of opportunity to think and reflecting. And often in these kind of, harrowing situations, I think about what my father would say or what my grandparents would say. They've all passed on. They died when I was in my 30s. Catherine M. Valente says, "We love World War II because the cause was so obviously just, because you can't be a good person and say you wouldn't fight against an evil like that. It was so black and white on our side, and on our side so few died." Our side meaning the lantern-jawed John Wayne Greatest Generation, constantly canonizing soldiers who strode in late to the graveyard that was Europe. Compared to Jewish, Russian, and Roma and other casualties, our losses were minimal. We felt so strong. In some ways, I think we were always trying to recapture that feeling of being a country of superheroes. With every war, we invoke that one. We hope it will be that good. My grandfather was a chaplain in the U.S. Army, started in 1941, and he served throughout the war. He was a little heavy at the time and had to diet. He told me he ate lettuce for a couple of months until he was skinny enough to get in and pass the physical. So he went to chaplain school at Harvard. I inherited a number of his chaplain books, and what struck me always about his ministry is he was very universalist. Like, he was not a hell preacher, and he had a lot of flexibility about other religions and other faiths because that was required of chaplains. My grandmother sewed Army pants during the war, and she told me she used to dream about them at night. She'd work 12, 14 hours a day making Army pants, and then she would just see their legs walk by. They were used to not having much. They tended to go for the soul job instead of the money job. I think the silent generation, my father's generation, had been children during the Depression, and they thought a lot about if they only had money, they would be all right. My grandfather had a wife and son in the 30s He was going to school at Vanderbilt and working full time. He worked at a dairy, and so he picked up the milk real early in the morning before he went to class. Then went to class. He made cheese all afternoon in big vats, and then worked at the ice cream parlor at night, and that's where he met my grandmother. I'll be the fourth out of 5 generations to be a minister. And then he was a minister for over 40 years all over rural Kentucky. He wouldn't lie about smoking cigarettes. Now, they were my roommates in their last 2 years of life. Both got cancer within 6 months of each other, and they at the kitchen table and read Louis L'Amour books and smoke cigarettes. He smoked like a chimney his entire life. 2-pack a day kind of guy. Camels is what he smoked. He didn't talk a lot, and when he preached, he told stories, and he didn't talk hell. And he was a pretty flexible guy and not very judgmental. And I really admire that about him. And they always had a big garden. And they were very frugal, but they had a good time. They did for themselves. My grandmother made my clothes, and she made her clothes and those army pants. She loved the sociability of the church. They'd have, potlucks with lots of green jello. I ate a whole plate of deviled eggs once. She was mortified. That was the kind of people that they were. Their house, and there was no air conditioning. They had one of those gray 1950s fans, and the fan would go back and forth like this. My grandmother would get in bed with me, and she'd read to me whatever Reader's Digest book my grandfather had gotten. And one time she read me Carl Sandburg's The Prairie Years, the War Years about Abraham Lincoln, which is a book about this thick. So she had the patience of a saint, and she would stay in the bed with me until I would go to sleep. That was the most stable household in my childhood. So when I think about the qualities that I adore, humility, they didn't brag about the things that they had done. Their house, when they retired, having been a Methodist minister, he lived in parsonages his whole life. And when he was 65, he and my Uncle Walt built them a house. And they didn't just build the house. They cut the trees down. They made the boards. That was the kind of people that they were. Other qualities that they had were their faith. They were extremely optimistic people, and not pie in the sky Pollyanna optimistic people. They were people who were like, I'm going to hang in. I'm going to bite down. I'm going to hang in until it gets better, because I know it will. And that was their life experience, because the Depression got better, even when it didn't look like it would. And World War II, they won. So I think these are qualities that we could adapt into our dealing with the pandemic. Who are your people, and who did you learn from? Who do you want to be? I think Ben Franklin would be proud of us. I think that we are totally capable of keeping this democracy and being the country that we want to be. And I think that we should be the country that pulled together and took care of each other and be stubborn about it, like the greatest generation. Would enjoy hearing what you have to say about this. Thank you.